Hello, everyone, and welcome to Yakima Chief Hops Virtual Harvest. My name is Nicole Sloan. I'm the events manager here at YCH. Before we get started, there were just a few logistical things that we wanted to go over before we get started. First of all attendees are automatically on mute to eliminate any background noise during the event, but you can always ask questions that you have by submitting them through the question and answer section at the bottom of your screen. We'll get to as many of those questions at the end of the presentation as we can. Also, if you see a question that has already been asked that you'd like to hear the answer to, rather than repeating, just make sure you do the thumbs up button and help move it up in the queue for the answers, or excuse me, for the questions, and those will float up to the top. You can also make comments throughout the event in the chat box. Just keep in mind that only questions in the official question and answer feed will be answered at the end of the event. So if you want it answered, make sure you get it in there. If you do experience any connection or audio issues, remember that we are recording all these sessions and the recordings will be available at virtualharvest.com soon after the live stream is completed. The daily sessions will appear at the top of the virtualharvest.com with links to the live and the recorded sessions. You can also click on the schedule tab and find the specific sessions you want to see and just find the click to watch button or the YouTube links. Also, if you'd like to download any presentations from previous sessions, those are also available at virtualharvest.com. For international users, especially those that don't have access to YouTube recordings, please head to virtualharvest.com. Find the link to register up in the Enroll Now button for Huva, the event app that we are using that will give you access to all the recordings, live sessions, presentations, speaker database, community boards, and more. So that's all for me. Again, thank you all for joining us today. Our session today is Brewing with Fresh Hops. We're here with Steve from Cloudburst and our host, Jeremy from YCH. So I'm going to pass it back on over to you guys.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you, Nicole. Yeah, and thank you for all the work you've been putting into Virtual Harvest. It's been awesome so far. Like she said, my name is Jeremy Wattenberg. I'm the technical brewery manager and sales liaison here at Yakima Chief Hops. Here with Steve Luke from Cloudburst Brewing up in Seattle. Thanks for joining in with us, Steve.
Yeah, no problem.
Heck yeah. So we're going to be chatting about fresh hops a little bit. I don't know about you. I know that this is my personal favorite time of year. This is the one time of year that, you know, we get to see all these brewers, meet all these growers with Yakima Chief. That's pretty much one of our main focuses, one of our main things that we try to do is connect the world's finest brewers with some of the world's finest growers. And, you know, Fresh Hop really is a time that we're able to do that. And it's a really neat time that you get to kind of have that face-to-face interaction. And I know our growers really, really appreciate that time and everything. So, yeah, thanks for being on, Steve. Why don't you tell us a little about yourself, man?
A little bit about myself. I'm a brewer, and I love making fresh hop beers.
Heck yeah.
So yeah, I started Cloudburst Brewing in 2015. We're downtown Seattle, Washington. Just opened up a second space that's mostly a beer garden in another part of Washington. We're really in another part of Seattle. But yeah, we kind of we do like a little over 2,000 barrels of beer a year. We're in a 15-barrel brew house, 3-vessel brew house for our kit. We've got 8 fermenters. 4 double batches, 4 single batches. So, you know, relatively like pretty small, intimate size. No flagships. We kind of just end up brewing what we want, or what the people want, which is a lot of IPA, like, you know, we all know. And yeah, just happy to be on here. Happy to give some advice about brewing with fresh hops.
Heck yeah. And, I know you guys, I'll just say this too. You make some of my favorite beers, some of my favorite fresh hops, not just in Washington, but just anywhere I've been, anything I've tried. So yeah, Steve, you know what you're talking about. Happy to have you on. So yeah, like I said, man, September is that one time of year I always look at as a brewer. I always see September coming around and I get pretty excited. What does the month of September usually mean for you? What's your month of September usually look like?
I mean, I think just like you said, I mean, we get just as excited for Hop Harvest as you guys do. It's such a small window, and being in this region of the country, it's so unique to us that we have the access and the availability to literally go travel the county, visit farms, come back with hops right off the picker, put them in beer. within 24 hours. And so we are always prepared. Like September is always going to be kind of our most labor intensive month just because of how many hours on the road. I mean, typically we're brewing, on average, we brew about 10 of these beers at our place and then thrown in a couple collabs. So I'm ping ponging back and forth between Seattle and Yakima for, 6 to 8 weeks, most harvests. So it's busy for us. It's exciting for us. It's exhausting for us. And we wouldn't have it any other way.
Heck yeah. How do you kind of, I know it's kind of a fluid motion with hops coming through, talking to some of our growers, even just something like an extra week of heat back in, a month ago, I'll throw off kind of those pick windows of everything that's going to be harvested at certain times. How do you kind of plan out what hops you're going to be getting? How do you plan out the hops you want to brew?
Plan. I mean, a lot of the times the plan is the plans are very loose around harvest time, which like coming from kind of like a type A personality, like you kind of have to just like let some things go. The varieties are going to be harvested when the farmers say that they're ready and when they're perfect to be picked. So having some tank flexibility is always key. I mean, as far as varieties, we certainly at this point, this is our 5th season doing this at Cloudburst. So we do kind of keep some of the same varieties in the rotation harvest after harvest. So we always start first thing with a Centennial beer. One, because it's always one of the first varieties picked, at least as far as like IPA specific varieties picked. But also because Centennial has such a rich history to it. Centennial beers, Centennial IPAs have been around for decades now. Those are kind of like your founding craft IPA hops. And we think it's important to continue to use hops like Centennial and Cascade, especially like in its purest, freshest, wettest form. Yeah. Then we always like leave a few tanks open for something new, some experimentals, some varieties we've never played around with. And then we kind of always certainly kind of round out our schedule, our harvest schedule with, a Simcoe beer, a Citra beer, a Mosaic beer, because those are the beers that it seems like the drinkers, are always incredibly excited about. I think you guys know, with the popularity of those hops in just regular IPAs, the fresh expression of those hops is even kind of more of this exciting, nuance that drinkers are ready to try out and get excited about.
Cool. Yeah. So I guess let's start getting into actually brewing with it, which is neat. So we'll start off really, really basic. Maybe there's some people who don't really know what a fresh hop is or haven't really seen too many fresh hop beers. What makes something a fresh hop beer versus something that you would maybe use T90 or a dry raw hop?
Well, I mean, so for us, we were talking about this during the brew day a few days ago, but typically around harvest with fresh hop beers, there's this semantic battle that is it a fresh hop? Is it a wet hop? Is it a green hop? And I personally use those, terms all interchangeably, green hops, wet hops, fresh hops. Those are all hops that have not been kilned. So they're right off the bine. They're usually going through the picker, and a lot of farms these days kind of now have diversion belts so that we can kind of get this like pure raw unkilned hop pellet and thrown in bags, so it's basically fully unprocessed for all intents and purposes. It's this unprocessed green living breathing hop. That's kind of that's, I guess, for the people that are like, what is a fresh hop? What does that even mean? So just unprocessed. Think of it's not really processed. I mean, we all know it's kind of processed through the picker a little bit, but it's by no means, anywhere a final product. As far as a brew schedule, you want to talk about that? Is that what we're
Heck yeah, we might as well.
What are we doing with them? What do we do with them? Now we have them. What do we do? I don't know. We put them in beer.
Totally. Yeah. Well, what's kind of the longest you would hold on to them before you throw them in?
So we certainly we have the proximity to Yakima. So if we can get them into wort in 3 hours, that's awesome. Typically we're doing around like a 20 hours. So we'll go out in the afternoon, we'll get the hops, we'll come back, put them in the cooler, we'll brew the next morning. That's kind of more of just like a more comfortable, like logistical production plan for us. We've brewed with hops, anywhere from 24 to 48 hours. I mean, since it is kind of this like green vegetal thing, you want it refrigerated, you want it cold, it's going to decompose as soon as it's in your car, as soon as it's in your box being shipped. So there is urgency to them. You want to use them as fresh as possible, but within 24 hours, within 48 hours, like that window, like we haven't really seen much of a difference.
Cool. Yeah, and I mean with wet hops, they're what, like 80% water or something like that. So evaporation probably plays a little bit of a part in that as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, man, when you're building up a recipe, what are kind of the things to keep in mind when you're brewing with fresh hops? I know like things like dosing rates for what you're going to use, and maybe like pH, since you are dealing with more water in those hops. What are kind of things when you're thinking of a recipe? Kind of what's your thought process for that?
I guess like our overall like philosophy when we're building a recipe with fresh hops for us is that we want to get these fresh hops touching as much wort during the process as possible. So we throw a handful of hops in the mash tun. It might not really do anything, but it's the good luck throw. Gets you pumped that you're going to be putting a lot more hops in there. So mash in, throw a handful of hops while you're mashing in. We'll put hops in our grant. So we have a grant. So at runoff, during our runoff, like hops are steeped in that wort in the grant. When we kettle up during the boil, we're adding wet hop bags to our kettle. So we are boiling some of the wet hops. And then depending on the batch size, we'll throw wet hops in the whirlpool as well. But really the big kicker is our mash tun. So I think a lot of brewers right now are already playing around with fresh hops. We're all kind of figuring out the same things. We convert our giant mash tun into a massive hop back, basically. And so post boil, we're cooling that wort down, and we're pumping our wort back over to that, cleaned out mash tun, loaded with hundreds of pounds of hops. We're recircing the wort once that mash tun is full of hops and our post boil. We're recircing it usually around 20 minutes or so, and then we actually knock straight out from that now I'm getting confused, from the mash tun. So we don't actually whirlpool because the mash tun recircing your wort over that many hops is clarifying your wort, just as well as a whirlpool would. So knocking out straight from the mash tun into the fermenter after our recirc. As far as kind of dosing rates, we found kind of a sweet spot depending on the beer. Anywhere from 15 pounds per barrel to 25 pounds per barrel is what we're using. Pale ales, 15 pounds per barrel. Dipos, 25, 30 pounds per barrel. Typically our IPAs are about 20 pounds per barrel. There's some balance, in there, even when we're adding things to the hot side. We're not seeing much utilization. We are seeing a slight drop in gravity, because of that water content, but nothing more than a Plato overall. So we are designing our malt bill pretty similarly to how we would just a regular, version of that style. And yeah, I mean, like, we've kind of all experimented over the years with, like, we've gone up to almost 40 pounds per barrel. It's pretty intense and crazy. And so kind of just like dry hopping rates, in craft beer these days, where I think you do find a sweet spot. And I think that there are some diminishing returns. If you use too many, it might not really make that much of a difference. Just like if you're dry hopping 7 pounds per barrel versus 15 pounds per barrel, you're probably not getting like that great a utilization on a dry hop with 15 pounds per barrel of a pellet kind of a thing. Yeah. So, and also that's insane. Who is dry hopping with 15 pounds per barrel of pellets? So yeah, that's kind of where we're at on the process side. And as far as our usage rates, I know you talked a little bit about like pH and stuff, and that's another thing of concern to us. We're adding so much vegetal matter and more water. So we are paying attention to our pHs more. Typically for like a normal IPA, our knockout wort pH is, between 5.2 and 5.0. We kind of want to keep that the same. We have noticed with fresh hops, we are adding more, phos acid, lactic acid, or citric acid, whatever you're comfortable with using. We are adding typically 50% to 100% more than we usually are, just to keep that pH, in the range that we're comfortable with. So yeah, that's kind of where one inkling as far as process is concerned. Something that people should be kind of cognizant of is like, you are using a whole bunch of vegetal matter into this beer, and so that's going to affect other things that you might not necessarily be thinking about.
Yeah, one of those things that I guess I didn't think about at times when I first started brewing fresh hops was that loss in your gravity, just because of all that water in there. So is that something you just adjust in that grain bill, or is that kind of just part of the fun of seeing where it winds up after the beer's finished?
Yeah, I mean, we're not really brewing the same beers twice very often, so I'm not designing a recipe that's gravity driven. It's certainly pretty rough and loose. It's we want this beer to be mid 6%. So here's what we're gonna do, and if our OG is 14.7 or 14.3, we're not really concerned with that. So the variance of the drop in gravity, it's kind of less of a concern to us. It's more of just oh, I wonder where this will finish up at. But that's kind of what we have. That's the luxury we have at our small size. We don't have to nail our gravity. I'm not upset if we don't get there.
That's kind of part of the fun of fresh hops too, is kind of the unpredictability of it, because you don't know what what variety you're going to get, but really you could, even if you plan a day rather than a variety, you could be picking up a different variety than you even thought, and you don't really, you haven't rubbed them or smelled them before, so you're just kind of hoping for what you get, and it's going to turn out great. But that's kind of part of the reason I love fresh hops too. Cool. So we're moving on. We're past the mashing. Now we're kind of coming to the hop additions. You said you already throw it in the grant on the way to the kettle. From there, do you see a difference in adding in the boil versus adding in that hop back?
I think we do. We add hot side pellet additions on our regular IPAs. I know a lot of people kind of have been getting shyer and shyer with adding hops to the boil, but I personally have always thought that they do add a component of flavor that tends to last longer than not doing so. Also, boiling some of that vegetative matter gives me the mouthfeel I want on these beers. I always describe these beers as chewy. You should be drinking a fresh hop beer, and when you finish, you should be searching around with your tongue to find, leaves in your teeth. It should have this textural component that is almost tricking your brain. There shouldn't be leaves in your pint at that point, but you should still be kind of feeling around for it. It's chewy. You're wow, that kind of had some grit to it. And I think you get that with those kettle additions. So I'm a believer in the hot side edition, whether it's a regular IPA or whether it's a fresh hop IPA.
Sweet. Do you notice anything kind of goofy in tracking IBUs or anything like that if you are throwing them in the kettle?
I know with the rates that we're using, you're not picking up that many IBUs, so you don't really have to be shy. Utilization is so poor with fresh hops. So we'll even add some pellets at boil. We'll add maybe a few pellets towards the end of the boil too, if we're concerned that we're not going to get enough bitterness, because sometimes even using it's hard to kind of grasp the thought of, I just put 300 pounds of hops in a 15-barrel batch of beer, and it's not going to be bitter enough. But sometimes that's kind of the way it goes. So.
Yeah, so you mentioned earlier too that you kind of bypassed that whirlpool just to go straight for a hop back. Could you kind of describe, if there's somebody who doesn't really know what a hop back is?
Yeah, a hop back, I don't think a lot of modern breweries really use hop backs, but it's basically something, you can use it really at many different parts of the brewing process, but it's a vessel, hopefully it's an insulated vessel that you are going to fill with wort. It tends to also have a false bottom with a mesh screen in it, so that you could put whole cone kilned hops in it, or thus fresh hops in it, and it would allow you to recirc wort through there without, worrying about clogging your pumps, your pipes, or getting, large matter into that wort. So by way of the mash tun conversion, a mash tun is basically a large hop back. You just might have rakes. You just might have rakes in this hop back. But yeah, I mean, the importance of the whole thing is that a mash tun is something that you have at your brewery, I hope, and that has a false bottom in it. So therefore, you can convert that mash tun to a hop back pretty readily. So, one of the things that you do have to take into account, like what we do for every fresh hop brew, after we've shoveled out our grain, we pull up our plates, our screens in our mash tun, and get a good spray out there. You want as little residual mash in that mash tun as possible. But then there's some other things you have to let go. We're never sanitizing our mash tun. I don't know many breweries that's part of their SOPs is to sanitize the mash tun. So you do have to kind of take into account how gross is your mash tun. I don't know. Ours is pretty clean. It's also pretty new. So, and then pay attention to temperature. So the temperature in our mash tun hop back, that wort's usually still above 180 degrees Fahrenheit. So we're kind of aiming at transfer anywhere from 200 to 190 degrees or so as far as our wort. And by the time we're done recircing and start knocking out, we're still above 180 degrees Fahrenheit. That makes us feel a little bit better as far as putting a beer, putting that wort in a tank and not having any contamination, since it's ostensibly always above 165 degrees Fahrenheit, where that pasteurization unit is at. So paying attention to that, it'll make you you'll sleep better at night knowing if your wort is at least 180 and it's scorching most horrible beer spoiler, bacteria, stuff like that.
Definitely, yeah. And I know the kind of a new trend that I'm seeing in a lot more breweries is kind of cooling down that wort on the way to the whirlpool, or in this case, the hop back. That's not something that you will want to do in this, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, if you do it, just be cognizant of how much is your I'd imagine most brewers are going to know, what is your mash temp drop, between, mash in and your rest, all the way through your runoff and sparge. So just be cognizant of that. If your mash tun isn't insulated very well and you're going to have a much larger temperature drop, then yeah, I wouldn't cool the wort down between then. Ours is pretty well insulated. So we do cool our wort down just 10 degrees. So we go from, 212 to 202, 200 going in there, and we'll have some loss, but just kind of be cognizant of your equipment.
Cool. Yeah, and you kind of mentioned the contaminants and everything like that. I know a worry about maybe throwing in on the dry hop is maybe contaminants, something like that. What do you see kind of in a hot side versus cold side with fresh hops?
Yeah, I mean, I guess people can throw these hops on the cold side. Some people do still kind of tweak around with those processes. I know Ben at Breakside has his liquid nitrogen frozen hop cone crush into conditioning tanks. We've aged finished IPA onto fresh whole cone hops before, and yeah, we've even fermented wort on fresh whole cones as well. On the conditioning side, you're going to be really concerned about DO pickup, making sure that vessel is super purged. So if you have any way to test how much oxygen is in that CT, obviously there's going to be more of it because you're putting in wet hops and probably a hop sack in there. And so along those lines, we don't personally do that, especially now, this harvest, we're going to be canning our beers. If we can get rid of that beer on draft in a day, we'll play around with cold side fresh hop additions, but putting beer in cans and putting it out there into the world, just personally as a brewer, I'm not comfortable with putting that in a package and not, I don't know what it's going to do. So I can't predict it. So I'd rather just, not have that happen to us. But I think it's pretty cool to play around with. If you're a small system, if you're a brew pub, if your beer garden is open right now, and you want to play around with throwing some wet hops on the cold side, or, you know, if you have a C box or an Orbisphere or some piece of lab equipment that can test your DO before you're transferring it over there, at least like, you know, what is the tank at, then I'd definitely be, you know, more comfortable with doing things on the cold side. For us, you know, we're dry hopping with pellets or cryo most of these beers, just because you know, you're going so far along in the process with putting so much of this like amazing fresh hop character into a beer on the hot side that, you know, you want it to smell equally as impressive. So by that, you know, we're adding pellets on the cold side as far as dry hop goes.
Cool. Yeah, so I know one of the kind of talking about aromas and things like that and just flavors, I know one of the things with fresh hops is they can, if you let them sit in that hop back or in that whirlpool a little too long, you can tend to sometimes pick up a little bit of that vegetal flavor to it. I kind of get that once in a while from dry hops if you use heavy-handed. But yeah, what's kind of the longest you would leave it in the whirlpool or hop back before you start pulling any of those vegetable kind of characteristics to it?
That's a good question. Well, I mean, so as far as our whirlpools go, you know, it takes us 20 minutes to fill up our whirlpool. We whirl for 15 minutes. Then, you know, we rest, we knock out. It's on those hops for about an hour and a half, probably total. That's probably about the same time that we're doing with our converted, you know, mash tun hop back as well. It's 20-minute transfer over, 20-minute recirc, 45-minute knockout kind of a thing. So I think as long as it's not like a few hours, we've never really like left it on these hops, walked away, forgotten about it, or we haven't had an issue, you know, with something mechanical going wrong and having us kind of just, you know, being like, oh crap, the wort's going to be on these hops for like 4 hours until we get this pump fixed or something like that. So luckily that hasn't happened to us. So yeah, I can't really speak for that. I mean, I think keeping it all with under like a 2-hour contact time is probably just like a good, you know, ballpark shooting from the hip thing. Makes sense to me as far as our process goes.
Yeah, that sounds about right. So we do have a couple questions in the Q&A that actually kind of fit towards what we're talking about now. So I'm going to ask a couple from there. But from Josh Lindsay, have there been any studies on whether you get more survivables from fresh hops? And then also on a similar note, any notable effects from fresh hops on hop creep or biotransformation or anything like that?
I don't know. I have never heard of really any studies, you know, done, I guess, since it's such a, like a niche beer style that I don't think people have kind of put much energy into researching on stuff like that. I haven't seen any like associated hop creep with it, because I think that's mostly on the dry side. And we're adding, you know, the majority of our fresh hops are all being added on the hot side. You know, so it's going through primary fermentation on these. And like the few things that I have done on the cold side with them, at least as far as like where we're adding fresh hops to a conditioning tank, that's on finished beer, and it is kept cold the entire time. Our house yeast flocks pretty well. And so we haven't experienced creep that. That being said, these beers kind of, we go through them so fast that nothing really is apparent to us, because I think if we had issues, that beer is long gone, you know, by then. Got
it. So kind of breaking off of that, going into the runoff now. I know you were telling me about kind of a fun project, and I know that this isn't really a standard for fresh hops or anything, but you mentioned kind of a runoff that you did onto fresh hops. What did you pull from that?
Yeah, that was the crazy Pine House boys' idea out of Austin, Texas. We did a collab and knocked out onto the fresh hops. So primary fermentation was with fresh hops, like in our fermenter in a bag. That beer made me very nervous. They bullied us. Yeah. They bullied us into doing this thing. No, it came out fantastic. I mean, I think just like how right now a lot of people are kind of figuring out, and a lot of it seems like it's more because of they're trying to avoid, you know, hop creep or figure it out. more brewers are starting to kind of knock out on a cryo powder per se for regular IPAs, or, they're playing around with day 1, day 2, day 3 dry hop additions. So for us, I mean, I don't know if the results typically, like when we've played around with that in a non-fresh hop beer, I think it probably was a similar way where I feel like the flavor was certainly more intense by doing that. But, that tank, we trashed our yeast. That tank got nuked with 2 different rounds of chemicals just because, we were fermenting on unprocessed hop cones that have all sorts of things, on them. And so, yeah, it was a fun experiment. I think just keeping in mind, the quality, your QA QC program, like that's a beer that was draft only, that we sold out of our tasting room, sold probably to a handful of accounts. It was kept cold the entire time, and, it was kicked in a week kind of a thing. So the more we're all for experimentation, you just can't really be reckless with it, is my opinion of it. So
cool. So do you, fresh hop beers are obviously like fresh hop is where you want that to shine, but do you ever do anything with kiln beers, T90, anything in the recipe as well, or besides the besides the besides the dry hop that you mentioned?
Dry hopping. Yeah. I mean, we'll throw like we'll throw some hops. We'll throw T90s, in the kettle. Not nearly as much as we usually do, but just for balance. I mean, we're using T90s on the hot side specifically just to balance our bitterness. And then, we're using pellets or cryo on our dry hop just to basically like create the final product that we're happy with. That's kind of it's pretty much like where we're at with like, we're feathering in other hop products in addition to these fresh hops. I mean, nowhere near the same levels that we would on a regular a beer, but they are there kind of just to kind of like fully round out the drinking experience on that beer.
Cool. Have you ever tried any fresh hops in any other beer besides an IPA?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think fresh hops lend themselves best to pales, IPAs, DIPAs. I mean, to me, this beer, these types of beers, it is all about the hops and that, chewy, fresh, leafy experience. So, obviously hop forward beers, I think, are just kind of like truly highlight that hop variety that you've decided to brew a beer with. I've had some fantastic lagers with fresh hops, both from hot side and cold side additions. And yeah, I mean, I let that variety kind of depend on the style of the beer. If we were brewing a fresh hop beer with, a more like noble-esque variety, then I think that'd be super cool to kind of throw that in a Pilsner. I mean, I think there's been a few brewers that have made some fresh hop stouts, some reds, the styles aren't really always about the hops to begin with. So I don't know if I could have personally said, oh yeah, this is definitely a fresh hop beer. That said, I mean, I think if somebody decided to dedicate a tank of, American Black Ale, a CDA, a black IPA, and use some like 472 from you guys, I'd be stoked to try it just to see. We're not going to make it, but like, send some to me. I would love to try it.
I'd be interested in that one too. That sounds awesome. CDA needs to make its comeback, man.
Someday.
Cool. Just personally, what are your favorite fresh hops, man?
Oh, personally, one of my favorite fresh hops. I mean, I really like them all. I mean, like, how do you pick a favorite kid? We certainly have like we do go back to the same farms for the same varieties at this rate. So, I mean, like we're always using Centennial from CLS. We're always using Citra from Loftus, maybe Tributary. I think actually we've gotten Tributary the last couple of years. And Simcoe and Mosaics from Peralt. It's kind of just those 4 are always what we've kind of done. We've been incredibly excited with and happy with every beer we've made with those hops. So why, if it's not broken, why change it? Like, we love those farms, we love those hops, and those are kind of like our guaranteed 4 fresh hops every year.
Cool. Yeah, and that's part of. I mean, that's probably one of the more fun parts of fresh hop season too. Is just the experience of going down to the farms, picking them up, chatting with the farmers. What's a farm pickup normally usually look like?
A farm picker?
A farm pickup.
Oh, what's a farm pickup look like?
Yeah.
So, I mean, we drive. One, it usually involves like a few weeks of me annoying the shit out of the farmer, texting them every day saying, hey, what's going on? How's this hop looking? What day are you thinking? You know, what works for you? So you know, you gotta warm them up. You gotta bring a bunch of swag and beer as well, because they just put up with you being annoying to them for, you know, a couple weeks beforehand. We show up, depending on, you know, if it's a single batch size, I bring my car. If it's a double batch size, I bring our delivery van. Each farm has their own procedures. I mean, this year the focus is obviously on safety. So everyone has face masks on. We're keeping our distance kind of throughout. I think it's probably weird for everybody out there right now too. You know, it's such a social industry. And so just maintaining your distance and being safe. There's hand sanitizer at every farm I've been to. There's visitor logs, so you know they can at least do contact tracing. They want to know who's coming through and what times. And yeah, I mean, usually like we're walking through the picker. Like I said before, it's pretty cool how over the last 5 years, a lot of farms have made picking up fresh hops easier. You know, by diverting belts. Almost having different bags designed, you know, to like grab the hops easier. Yeah, I mean, we load up, we get on out of there. I mean, you guys, farmers are so busy right now that we don't want to be a pain. We just want their beautiful hops. And then, you know, usually within 3 weeks later, we're back out there again, dropping off the beer that we made with their hops. We couldn't have made without them. So they at least kind of get to see full circle pretty quickly, you know, something that they helped make. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. I know personally it was good getting to see you the other day when we did that brew. And I know our farmers are really happy to see everybody. Normally it's been a weird month of September already, just because normally this time of year it's selection. It's usually shoulder to shoulder with brewers and breweries from just all over the world. And, you know, fresh hops on top of it. So it's been a weird year, but I know even those little bit of interactions, I've heard a couple of our growers just talking about how much it just kind of brings a normality to them.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Now's your time to brag a little bit. What are some beers you have coming out of Cloudburst?
Brag. Oh, man. We don't brag. What do we have? How about fresh hops? So we have a pail from Centennial. We've got a Strata with IPA. Got an IPA with Cascade. We've got an IPA with Simcoe and a little bit of Sabro that we're brewing today. And then we'll have a Citra IPA and a Mosaic IPA collab here. We've got another Citra IPA with our friends out there at Bellbreaker. So only 7 fresh hops for us this year. Usually it's closer to double that, but in times like these, you know, it's kind of weird, and we don't want to, you know, we kind of want to just make sure we're doing everything safe in the right way. So we cut back a tiny bit, but that's what we got going on. Again, I mean, we love this time of year. It's our favorite time of year. It's our busiest time of year. And these beers are so unique. I mean, they're that true farm to table experience that, you know, we all kind of romanticize, and they deliver on it. So yeah, we're stoked that hops are being picked and everything's looking great so far.
Nice. Yeah. So one more thing before we get to just the Q&A and the video that we kind of put together of just kind of seeing the process and everything and watching our brew that we did the other day. But just any final pieces of advice if somebody wants to brew a fresh hop.
Oh, don't fuck it up. That's no. I think it's all, I mean, take a step back, and it's beer. It should be fun. I mean, it's ridiculous, the rates of hops that we're using. You know, we've had friends kind of come out around this time of year in the past from all over the world. We've had brewers in from Beijing, Japan, Brazil. And when you tell them, you know, we're making a beer and it's 20 pounds per barrel of hops, that's insane. That's ridiculous. And so treat these beers like they're ridiculous. They are, and they're awesome, and they should be fun. So don't stress out about it. I mean, you know, there's really kind of worry about the process that you usually do while you're making beer. You're adding in a whole lot more hops. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be great. And you know, no need to really like stress out about it. Keep it fun. It's a silly beer style. So just roll with it. You know?
Yeah. Well, cool. Yeah, that's pretty much all the questions I got for you. One thing to note, I'll brag for you a little bit. I know you guys are coming open with a new tap room out in Ballard. So that's a pretty neat thing. If anybody listening, if you guys are ever in that area, stop in, say hello to Steve. One of the coolest guys I know, some of the best beer I've ever had. Give it a shot. At this point, we have a video of the process of the hops being picked, everything like that we're going to play. Please bombard us with questions. We got a little bit of time left, so anything you guys want to throw at us, we're happy to answer. So I'll kind of start digging through these a little bit. So what's a typical hop schedule using all Centennial? Like when would you kind of be looking for Centennial? When would you kind of go and pick that up?
Oh, I mean, I guess the pick window for Centennial, at least, you know, out in Yakima, it seems like it's like usually late August. So like August, I think this harvest was August 22nd. I think down in Oregon, they're usually, you know, 5 days ahead of Washington. So that like mid-August kind of window. And Centennial's probably picked up until, you know, the first couple of days of September, depending on the farm, depending on, you know, their location. If you're talking more about like hopping schedule, as far as like how we're brewing with it, you know, we kind of went over with where we're adding the hops, but with Centennial, you know, we don't bitter with Centennial, but we'll add it, you know, during the boil, towards the end of the boil, whirlpool, you know, dry hop kind of a thing. If I was designing a Centennial beer.
Cool. Yeah, it's pretty early on hop too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So another one I was reading through on the questions. This one came in, I believe, earlier in the week. But as a new brewer, what are some just go-to hops that are good to use? Some easy to use ones, easy to brew with hops that you would suggest?
Easy to brew with hops. I mean, like, I think Citra is the easiest. I don't know. I guess that's not a good term, easy. Citra to me plays well with hops. It elevates hops. It can also be the only hop in the beer. And it's basically kind of this like all-purpose hop that, you know, it makes everything better. I think we've seen it as far as acreage goes. With how much is being planted, so how much people actually like it, and it truly is kind of this super pleasant, citrusy, peachy hop that you know is good in most American styles.
Neat. Yeah. Anybody else want some other questions? Type them in, please. We're happy to answer. I'll check the chat real quick. Cool. Yeah. There we go. So from Jimmy, how much does flavor differ from processed hops of the same varietal without knowing the hop could it be pointed out easily?
Whoa. Can you repeat that?
Sorry. Yeah, I messed that one up. How much does a flavor differ from processed hops of the same varietal? And then second question, without knowing the hop, could it be pointed out easily?
Oh, sure. We have found some differences between like a pellet version and a fresh hop version of things. And I don't know if it's just because, you know, there's always some wiggle room between like, you know, the type of pellets that you're using versus, you know, did we just brew a fresh hop with early picked Citra versus late picked Citra when our pellets are typically, you know, a blend of early picked Citra. So I do think like that vegetal component is there, but to me, it's never like I rarely see like a dankness in fresh hop beers that we're making. It tends to be like brighter. So even saying like, oh, this is a vegetal component, it's not like a dank vegetal component. It's truly more of like leafy greens. Sometimes you get green beans. Sometimes you get, I mean, I hope you don't get broccoli, but sometimes you get broccoli. But yeah, it's kind of just this more of like a leafier yet still pretty bright and snappy from what I've seen. And then sometimes there's curveballs. I mean, when we kind of see more differences when you're cold conditioning finished beer on wet hops versus hot side use of fresh hops. So hot side use of fresh hops, I think you tend to get kind of more similar flavors to that as far as palates are concerned. But cold side, you never really know what you're going to get, I've found. So we've done some cold side fresh hop beers with Centennial hops that smell like artificial Jolly Rancher watermelon candy. And you're like, where did that come from? Like Centennial hops to me, I rarely get watermelon as a characteristic, but on the cold side, it smelled like artificial watermelon. So that was kind of a cool, unique surprise. So yeah, you kind of never really know, but you can kind of, it's safe to assume that it should be fairly similar.
Cool. Then we got one from Rob Harrington. Steve, are you planning on canning any fresh hop beers this month, or will they all just be on tap?
We're gonna can them all. They're all gonna be in cans. Cans are life. Cans are life now. So
cool. How's the rest of the Cloudburst family up north? You guys staying healthy?
Yeah.
Best you can.
Staying busy.
So we're getting to the part where you're brewing now. This is that grant that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, that's our grant. Zach should have gloves on, but he doesn't. So hey, you know, that's okay. It's getting boiled anyways.
Number one.
That's us cleaning out the mash tun.
Yeah. Then I think we got another of you guys kind of cleaning it out, make sure it's nice and clean. Like you said, it's just, that's kind of a big part of it, just making sure it's real clean in there.
Yeah.
Ooh, we got another question in. Okay, so D. Schaefer, I might have missed this, but is your dry hop charge the same amount as you would use for a typical pale IPA double, or just enough to boost aroma?
That's a great question. No, you didn't miss it. I'd say on average, we're probably around like 2/3 to 75% of what we would usually be using on those styles. So it is slightly less.
Then from Jimmy, are there any hop varieties that vary a lot between years, fresh or processed?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that. I think a lot of variance, you know, depends on you know, the farm, how many acres they have, and their picking facilities. So the most variances that I've seen are, you know, when ideal pick windows are missed. And so as far as varieties go, I think that kind of depends on what some of the larger varieties are and the importance of those varieties and the procedures in place. So I guess the easiest example is Cascade. You know, a lot of farms are growing Cascade. Cascade tends to have, you know, I guess traditionally a large window, but also Cascade might not always be that most important hop to be picked. I think a lot of farms have to be like, all right, well, Simcoe is ready right now and Cascade is ready right now, but we are going to be picking the Simcoe because that's a priority for us. And so you're going to see more variance in Cascade. And I know people like YCH, you guys have been really great on pick window schedules. So, and Jeremy, I'm sure you're more familiar with this, but I know that, you know, for Simcoe, for Citra, for Mosaic, YCH gives farms, you know, this ideal pick window that these farms have to meet in order to ensure the quality of that Simcoe, that Citra, and that Mosaic. And so I'm sure there are occasionally extenuating circumstances, but that's kind of where YCH comes in, and YCR monitoring the quality and pick windows of these hops so that there are less variances. So, but other varieties, it's always a hard call for farmers, and some are definitely better at it than others. And I think that's what's going to end up causing these variances between varieties or the same variety.
Yeah, and there's so many factors that go into those pick windows too. Like 12 hours of a 110-degree day can make that difference,
Yeah.
Things like the fires going on in Yakima, things like that. Those all make a difference in that pick window. So, all right, let's jump back in. Can you explain, from Jamie Chamberlain, I'm familiar with the term grant. Can you just kind of explain what a grant is and kind of the benefits of that?
Totally. Yes. I love grants. You don't see a lot of them anymore. Grants are kind of this, I guess you would say it's a pretty old, like archaic brewing technology, but it's also like very simple and makes a lot of sense. So a grant's purpose is basically to reduce negative pressure on a mash tun between the mash tun and the pump. So when you're running off and sparging, if you have one single outlet on your mash tun and you have a pump that's connected to that single outlet, you're now effectively sucking and putting pressure on your mash bed because that pump is displacing that liquid while putting it into the kettle. So what a grant does is basically a vessel that you're going to be running off into a separate isolated vessel, and then your pump is attached to that vessel. So that pump, our like runoff pump, is sucking the wort off of the grant, which is open to atmosphere and not affecting our mash at all. And so we're then controlling the flow of wort from our mash into the grant. So our mash remains untouched. It's gentle. And so as a result, like we never have stuck mashes. I'm going to knock on wood right now because you should never say that, but like you're way less likely to ever have stuck mashes. You have way more predictable runoff times, and your mash efficiency is much higher in my experience with mash and ladder tons that do have grants or some way to alleviate that pressure.
I love brewing with grants too. They're incredible. I love your brew system.
I guess one more thing on that too. So like I've modified brew houses in the past that didn't have grants. It doesn't have to be a bit like ours is 1 barrel as far as volume goes, but a lot of brewers, you can just saw off a keg top, weld 3 legs onto the bottom of it, throw 2 TCs on there, and you can make a keg grant so that you have like 10 gallons of wort in there and hook up your pump to that keg grant. Works like a charm. So it doesn't have to be a fancy, specifically like made thing. Like you can kind of make that anything you want.
Cool. From J. Odd, do you brew with any import hops, and if so, what are they?
Totally, yeah. I mean, as far as like European varieties, we brew with, we use a lot of Magnum for bittering, Czech Saaz, Hallertau Mittelfruit, Tettnang. We use some of the new German hops too, like we'll do Sapphire, Mandarina, Huel Melon. I love Hallertau Blanc in IPAs specifically. English hops we use, depending on style, UKG or Fuggles. Southern Hemisphere, Galaxy, Nelson, Matueka, Vic Secrets, Enigma, New Zealand Cascade, I think has been really cool to play around with the last couple of years. I think that had a different name before, like it was maybe Tahiti or something. Yeah, we like to play with everything. I mean, I guess YCH knows this, and so do other hop brokers, but we never say no to 44 pounds of anything the first time. So if there's something that we've never heard of, we'll take a box and we'll figure it out. So because of that, we've certainly played around with quite a bit of varieties outside of North America too.
Cool. From Sample Intern Trio, I like that name. What is the oddest thing you've put into a beer to add flavor? For example, Nate from Wandering Hop putting cake in his beer.
He put cake in his beer?
Apparently he put cake in his beer.
Oh, man. I mean, the weirdest thing. You know, like the things that I'm going to put into beer that are weird are because I believe that they actually will have a true flavor impact, and almost like, this isn't to say that this was, but we kind of avoid the gimmicky things. Like, I'm not going to put cereal into, I'm not going to put Fruit Loops into a mash tun. I'm not going to put cake or marshmallows. I'm going to try to get those flavors somewhere. I mean, I think maybe marshmallows might impact some flavor, but I guess I kind of have more of an old school curmudgeon-y brewer response to that. I mean, if it can affect flavor, that's awesome. I guess maybe the weirdest thing would be we tried to make a beer inspired by a gin and tonic. And so we titrated some water with quinine to kind of give that tonic-esque flavor. And that was kind of weird. We ended up then thinking that, we don't know how much quinine is in this. So we had to send it out to a very expensive lab to make sure it wasn't like above FDA levels. So then it gets like this weird, crazy thing. And, that we're more traditional as far as our recipe and beer design goes.
Cool. Then we only got a couple minutes left, so I'll ask a couple quick ones. One quick one, just kind of looping back, but might as well answer it, was how do you determine the IBUs with fresh hops?
Honestly, I don't. And when I design recipes, I use an old Ray Daniels formula as far as calculating IBUs. So I do calculate IBUs on all of our recipes when I'm designing a recipe. For fresh hop, at this point, brewing them so many times, I don't at all. They really don't, at least as far as our procedures go. I'm going to guess that they probably add, if you're going like 15 pounds per barrel, all on the hot side, I think we're only really picking up, 20 or so IBUs. It's really soft. If we were to use no pellets, which we have it on a few pale ales a couple of years back where we just said 0 pellets, except for dry hop, and that beer was really soft. And so, yeah, I think don't worry about it. Maybe give yourself some wiggle room. If you are going to titrate it with pellets to kind of get into the IBU range that you want, just aim low, and so that if you do pick some up, like, you're still kind of within that window. That's kind of the best way I can say it. But yeah, we don't even calculate them anymore because it is pretty minimal.
Cool. Then last question to end it off. What is your personal favorite hop to brew fresh hop beer with?
What is my personal favorite hop to brew a fresh hop with? I mean, I'm going to say Citra. And some of it is, so the Citra was the very first fresh hop brew that I ever made in 2010 at Rogue's Issaquah Brew House. I just moved out to the region, so they weren't that big of a deal 10 years ago. But kind of moving to the Northwest, being like, wow, we can do this. Then I went to my first Fresh Hop Fest ever, and I ended up meeting the Smiths, which is where I got the Citra from. So it's sentimental because now they're dear friends. And so every year, we brew the Citra. I think it's also the hop that we use the most at our brewery. It's just a powerhouse. And so, I'm going to go with that predictable answer of it's Citra.
Citra. Well, cool. Hey, thank you so much for joining in on this. It was awesome getting to chat with you. Always good to see you, man. I'm excited to try that beer we got to brew earlier in the week. And thank you, man. Super informative. I'm sure everybody appreciates it. I know everybody here at YCH does. And thank you, everybody who joined in. It was awesome. Yeah, thanks for joining. Hopefully we get to see you guys all here next year when the world's back to normal. Hopefully everybody's staying safe. I'm going to hand it back to Nicole. And thanks again.
Yeah, so before I let everybody go, I just want to extend a huge thank you to our speakers today. So thank you, Steve from Cloudburst and JT. It's always good to see you. So thank you guys so much for presenting and giving so much great information. I know I learned a lot, so I'm sure everyone else has too. And then also just a quick reminder for those of you on the call that this session was recorded and will be available to replay on demand at virtualharvest.com or within the Hoova app. And that's it. So thank you everyone again for joining us today on this virtual harvest session. Hope to see you on the next one. Goodbye.